Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil A. Colonna, and this is Nashville. 63 years ago today, groups of African-American students and their allies did something that might sound ordinary, but was incredibly risky at the time. They sat down at some of Nashville's downtown lunch counters and asked to be served. These sit-ins drew attention to the segregation of Nashville's businesses and eventually did bring about change. Today, we'll talk with three people who risked their safety and their futures to take part. But first, Paul Shane Garrett was convicted for a crime he did not commit. He spent a decade in prison before being released in 2011. Then he spent the next 10 years fighting to clear his name, and he won. Last week, Metro Council approved the $1.2 million settlement awarded to Garrett after criminal court judge Mark Fishburne lambasted the police and former district attorney Tory Johnson for their handling of the case. There are a lot of pieces to this, and the Nashville Banner, in collaboration with News Channel 5, have been reporting on the story. Here with me now is Steve Cavendish, editor of the Nashville Banner. Steve, it's good to see you again. Welcome back.
Great to be here, Khalil.
So let's start with the beginning. Who is Paul Shane Garrett, and what was he arrested for?
Paul Shane Garrett was arrested on suspicion of murdering a prostitute in 2001. It was a year 2000 crime, and Garrett, after 2 years of being in jail, eventually pled guilty to the crime, and he says, and has said in interviews, that he was faced with the death penalty that was being kind of levied against him, and he feared it, and so he pled guilty in order to kind of take that off the table. And so he ended up spending a little more over 10 years in jail. Well, I should say in prison.
Now, in your story with News Channel 5, you report that there were irregularities with the investigation. Can you talk to me about that?
Sure. From the beginning, there were always doubts kind of lingering kind of within the DA's office. There was a situation where the cops in the case really pressured Garrett in interviews and really kind of cobbled together what they said was a confession, but he never actually confessed. But the problem is that the cops lied on the stand. In a preliminary hearing, one of them said in open court that he confessed to the crime, which was not true. And so he felt like, I can't go against what the police are saying about me. I'm going to plead this out in order to kind of avoid the death penalty.
Now, you said that 2 years into being in prison, Garrett pled guilty. He took a confession, but did he continue to profess his innocence to friends, family, and his attorneys? He
did. He fought this. Tried to fight this through the system, and then after he was released in December of 2011, sought to have the conviction overturned. But there were some things that came up sort of in the interim that were problematic. Notably, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation got a hit in their CODIS system, which is a DNA database, which identified someone else as being potentially the person who killed Velma Tharp, the victim in this crime, and it was never disclosed to Garrett until later. And so this becomes a problem, and some cold case cops in 2011 are looking through a number of crimes that against sex workers around this period from 1999 to 2000, and they go back through Garrett's file and they see this CODIS hit, and they're like, wait a minute. There's potentially someone else here, and so a guy named Mike Rowland, who was one of the cold case officers, digs back through this file and finds that there's a lot of problems. Finds this kind of like shaky confession. There's not much documentation kind of in his file, all sorts of issues, and so he takes it to the DA's office, and the DA's office ends up reinvestigating the crime.
Now, in your reporting, you say that there was a quote unquote clandestine meeting.
Yeah, that's Judge Mark Fishburne's term. District Attorney Tory Johnson. I'm going to stumble all over this.
It's okay.
District Attorney Tory Johnson, Police Chief Steve Anderson, Kathy Morante, who was an ADA at the time, the public information officers Don Aaron and Susan Nyland from the police and DA's offices, and Tom Thurman, who was the deputy DA, all had this meeting and were trying to figure out what to do with this information that Rowland brought to them. And so Tory Johnson issues asks Morante to do a report. And she comes back with this 20-page report that has kind of three chief findings. One, there's no credible evidence that Garrett did the crime. Second, that there could be actual evidence of his innocence. And thirdly, they named this guy, Calvin Atchison, who was the person who showed up in 2004 in the CODIS database as being potentially the person who killed Velma Tharp.
So what was the result of this secret meeting? What'd they do next?
Very little. So DA Johnson sent a letter to the parole board that said basically, we don't have a lot of faith in this conviction anymore. So if you want to go ahead and let him out, that would be fine with us. I'm paraphrasing. It was a big long letter, but he doesn't want to be in the parole system, and so he actually serves out the rest of his term to the end, December of 2011, and he ends up getting out and being free, and then that's when he starts fighting for this sort of post-conviction relief. And there's actually a hearing in 2012, and at this point, the cops know that DNA implicates someone else and have known for a while. The DA's office doesn't have any faith in the conviction, and as a matter of fact, they have an internal report that says we don't think he did it. And yet, Tory Johnson's office in 2012 defends the conviction in court and defends it at the appellate level as well. And this really kind of prevents Garrett from getting any sort of relief, which he would later do in the settlement.
Now, in your story, you write that it wasn't until 2021 where the case was considered by the DA's Conviction Review Office. How was it brought to the attention of District Attorney Funk?
So Mike Rowland, the same cop, the same cold case cop, when this Conviction Review Unit was formed, went back to there's an assistant district attorney named Sonny Eaton who's running the Conviction Review Unit, and said, hey, I've got this case that I've never felt good about. I wish you'd take a look at it. And Eaton goes and pulls Garrett's file, and the first thing she sees is this CODIS hit, and she's like, she's kind of flabbergasted. And then she sees this internal report that the DA's office knew about it, and is just absolutely flabbergasted. So they partnered with the Tennessee Innocence Project. They reinvestigate the entire case, and their office concludes that this sort of merits vacating that conviction.
Now, last year, Paul Shane Garrett sued Metro government, the DA's office, and the police department for $18 million. Last week, a settlement was reached for $1.2 million. You write that outgoing criminal court judge, and you mentioned it earlier, Mark Fishburne, did something rather unusual in his opinion. So the district attorney's office has gone back and charged Calvin Atchison in this case. He was the other person's whose DNA showed up. In that case, they're in kind of a preliminary hearing stage, and it comes before Mark Fishburne. And Mark Fishburne did not run for re-election. He's kind of finishing up some cases in a sort of a special capacity. He's sitting in this preliminary hearing and reviewing the arguments in front of him, and reviews the Conviction Review Unit file and all of this, and just absolutely excoriates the District Attorney Tory Johnson's office and MNPD. Basically says they knowingly left an innocent man in jail for 10 years. They called it malfeasance. He called it a failure at every level of local law enforcement. And it was just really an extraordinary sort of order. And I've never seen anything like that. Lawyers that I've talked to had never really seen a sitting judge just kind of rake a department over the coals like that. And I think it's really interesting because Fishburne has a reputation as being a very straight shooter. He's not like somebody that goes off on these sort of tangents. And so I just thought it was extraordinary that you had this and that
nobody was talking about it.
How was this story kept out of the press for so long? That's a question I have.
You have to have a functional press in order for that to be, I think, a legitimate question. We don't cover the courts anymore. I mean, in the 90s, when the Tennessean and the Banner were going head to head, and you had big daily newsrooms kind of going after each other. You had multiple people in each newsroom covering different facets of the court every day. You had people whose offices were in the courthouses, and so they didn't miss these sorts of things. Now you're lucky if somebody is even reading court dockets on a regular basis. And we talk about kind of things that help a democracy function, kind of the ability to have oversight over the courts, and the ability for people to understand what's happening in our court systems is a big part of it. This is something that I think, if it had broken 25 years ago, would have been a 3 or 4 day story of this extraordinary order from Fishburne, and then reaction, and then kind of delving into, okay, how many possible cases like Garrett's are out there? How many different how many different interactions have people had with the justice system that were as screwed up as this one? And you don't have that right now, because we don't have the same bandwidth as a functional press.
Steve Cavendish is the editor of the Nashville Banner. You can find his story in partnership with News Channel 5 on this episode's web post at thisisnashville.org. Steve, always thank you for being here, and thank you for this reporting.
Thanks, Khalil. Appreciate it.
We have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll take you out to the old Woolworth lunch counter, where 63 years ago today, young students took a seat to fight segregation. What do you know about the Nashville sit-ins? Tweet us at thisisnashville. We'll be right back.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for prep and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil A. Colonna, and this is Nashville. Downtown Nashville in the 50s and 60s was a bustling shopping district, but not everyone got to enjoy all that downtown had to offer. That's because, of course, Nashville's lunch counters were segregated. But on this day, in 1960, that started to change. A few times a month, we're going to take you out into the city with us to show you an ordinary street corner, a vacant grocery store, the side of an office building. Now, I know what you're thinking. That doesn't sound very exciting. Our goal is to take you back in time, to bring our history to life, to show you what our city has been. Today, we're dropping a pin at 2021 Representative John Lewis Way. 221 Representative John Lewis Way, the longtime home of the Woolworth department store. It's a place that would become famous as one of the locations where Nashville students staged the first sit-ins 63 years ago. To understand why these students chose this location, you have to understand that back in the mid-1900s, there weren't malls or big box stores. So Woolworth and stores like it were the places to go, to shop, grab a bite to eat at the lunch counters. Our senior producer, Steve Harouche, is going to take it from here.
As a 12-year-old, Reverend Marguerite Smithson remembers going downtown with her mother, Mama Body, as she was known around North Nashville.
We always wanted to say, Mom, we want to go in and eat in there at the counter. And she had such a sad look on her face, but yet a determined look. She says, no, baby, we can't go in there. We can't eat in there. We'll get something to eat when we get home.
Now, Linda Wynn's family did go inside.
One could go in and spend their money for goods, but you could not spend your money for a service. And certainly being able to partake of a meal or fountain drink was a service. So that was the irony of the whole thing. You know, your money's good enough for one part of the store, but not good enough to sit at the welcome table, if you will.
welcome table one of these days. Hallelujah. I'm gonna sit at the welcome.
It was during this very hour, in 1960, that African American students from Fisk, American Baptist College, and Tennessee A&I, as TSU was known then, decided to challenge this norm. They walked into Woolworth, along with Kress and McClellans, sat down at the lunch counters, and demanded to be served just like their white counterparts. Many were jeered and beaten. It was there, at Woolworth, that civil rights activist John Lewis was arrested for the first time on the street that now, 6 decades later, bears his name. As desegregation efforts intensified, Black Nashvillians started boycotting the downtown stores altogether. By May, 6 of the downtown lunch counters were open to anyone. It was a win for civil rights, even if it was only a fraction of the city's businesses. Still, being allowed is not the same as being welcome. And as much as Marguerite Smithson had longed to eat at the Woolworth lunch counter, she didn't end up going after all.
You know what? I never did. I really never did. It was odd. I just didn't have the desire to go in there. I really didn't. Now, there are some people who really did. They rushed to go in, but I never did. I think it was part of it was I never forgot the look on my mom's face, that she was trying to give us the best that she could, and she could not do that one simple request: go into Woolworths and eat.
I'm gonna sit at the welcome table one of these days.
The sit-ins were really only the beginning of the fight for equality in Nashville, and this building will forever be synonymous with that struggle, even if that history became less and less visible as the years went on. After Woolworth shut down in 1993, Dollar General eventually moved in, and it looked like a Dollar General. After that, the building sat empty for years, until Tom Morales came along.
It was in really bad repair.
Tom is something of a serial restaurateur. His company revamped the Loveless Cafe and Acme Feed and Seed. And Tom had a plan. He wanted to resurface this history and put it on display in a new restaurant called Woolworth on 5th.
We kind of crawled through every space in there trying to figure out how we could bring it back to the day that John Lewis was arrested. And I mean, we even found white-only bathroom signs. And I mean, it was a chilling discovery walk through that building.
His company spent about $2 million meticulously recreating the lunch counter and the period-specific feel of the space, using photographs from the Nashville Public Library as reference. They even found original Woolworth stools from the 1960s on eBay. It was a huge endeavor, but preserving that history was important to Tom.
I spent most of my adult life trying to save history, in buildings in Nashville that I saw as a child that were significant.
And the Woolworth building was certainly one. But even after all of that, Woolworth on 5th closed down after only 2 years, just before the pandemic hit. Shortly after that, the building made the yearly Nashville 9 list of endangered properties. Brian Mansfield with Historic Nashville, Inc. says that wasn't because the building itself was in danger, but that the history could be.
Historically, the most important thing that happens in that building happens really in the space of about 1 year.
In the grand scheme of things, that's less than 100th of the time this building has been standing. But that year, 1960, is one of the most transformational moments in this city's history. For whoever the next owners would be, Historic Nashville suggested they bring in a trained preservationist.
The last thing that you want to do is stick a bunch of historic items into a window front display, because the sunlight will bleach those things out, and then you destroy them even while you're trying to show the historical significance. I mean, that's one of the dangers that well-intentioned people with a passion for history can, it's a mistake they can make if they come in without the training and preservation.
So the new owners would be challenged from the very start to do right by this space. I'm standing outside of the old Woolworth building with Joe Bravo. He's the VP of operations for the newest iteration, a theater. And right here is exactly what Brian Mansfield says shouldn't be here. 2 original stools from the original lunch counter in a window display.
Well, when we came in, we were using it to be a theater, but we wanted it to at least do some kind of a tribute to the lunch counter and the sit-in. So what we did is we did a recreation of the lunch counter. Now, these 2 seats are the actual seats that were in the lunch counter.
The display includes an old Woolworth sign, and a trench coat similar to one John Lewis wore hangs on one of the stools.
You want to walk inside?
Yeah, absolutely. After you.
Oh, sorry.
We weren't in the business of creating a historical place of interest. That was not in our business plan. But when you take a building like this, you then have a responsibility to cultivate that history. And my goal is to make sure that these stories keep being told.
The remaining artifacts, like the original wood railing, help ground these stories. And Joe has found what he believes to be an old whites-only water fountain that he hopes to restore. There's also the original white tile backsplash from the lunch counter on the 2nd floor, still intact, with a large cornucopia design every few feet.
So the lunch counters ran from about right here all the way down. And this is the backsplash, and you can see there's menu boards and whatnot here. But this was one of the original items, and we wanted to preserve it. And even though it's been beat to hell, we wanted to make sure that when people walk by here, they could see it. So we'll be adding some plaques.
At the far end of the counter, Joe stops. This spot is something you might recognize from the documentary John Lewis, Good Trouble.
Right here, in that video, you can line up the corner of the wall, you can line up the railing and whatnot, and you can see it was John Lewis was here with one of his compatriots, and they were getting beaten right here. When I watched that, it gave me chills because I walk through here every day.
So Joe is certainly trying to preserve the history, but the Woolworth Theater has also made changes. Down on the main floor, there used to be another lunch counter. This is where Tom Morales and his team had built the replica counter that was the centerpiece of the Woolworth on 5th restaurant.
It was not where the original lunch counter was. It was about 1.5 feet further out. There was another wall there. And it really needed to be ripped out. We had to redo it.
That choice caught Tom's attention.
I called raising hell when they started ripping out stuff, and then they're saying on Facebook they're not ripping it out, and we go into the alley and there's $1 million worth of work laying in the back alley in dumpsters. The idea that we would meticulously restore that building to as it once was, as it was the day John Lewis was arrested there, and then the total disregard coming in after us and just ripping out for no good reason that I can see, other than it made it easier to build a stage, maybe.
That's not the only concern. Last year, the Woolworth Theater came under scrutiny when they hosted a private screening of Candace Owens' film, The Greatest Lie Ever Sold, George Floyd and the Rise of BLM. The event was sponsored by the conservative media company, The Daily Wire. Its co-founder, Ben Shapiro, has argued, among other falsehoods, that systemic racism does not exist. Attendees at the event that night included Kid Rock and the rapper Ye, who had recently made headlines for a series of anti-Semitic comments. Having an event like that, in a place like this, with such a strong tie to the civil rights movement and its current iterations, seemed a bridge too far for many. But Joe Bravo doesn't exactly see it that way.
Well, I don't really comment on private events. The one thing I will say is this is an inclusive space. There are going to be people that we agree with, and there are going to be people that we disagree with. But one of the things is in being in an inclusive space, that means you're welcoming to everyone.
This has not always been a place that was welcoming to everyone. And changing that did not come without struggle. So whatever business prints 221 Representative John Lewis Way on its business cards, the old Woolworth building will forever be connected to what happened here in 1960. Linda Wynn from the Tennessee Historic Commission says it's vital we don't forget.
And I would say, yes, that history of that building still remains ever present, certainly in the memory of those of us who were here. Unless we keep the history and the narrative of that story alive, it becomes lost on the younger generation. And I fear with, if I dare go here, the banning of African American history. The generation coming after this will know absolutely nothing.
My next guests know firsthand what this history means. King Hollands and Frankie Henry were two of the students who sat down at segregated lunch counters on this day in 1960. King, Frankie, I want to thank you so much for being here. Welcome to This is Nashville.
Thank you.
Thank you.
King, I'd like to start with you. How did you get involved with the civil rights movement?
Well, I was a student at Fisk University, a freshman, and I was a part of the student International Student Center, and since I was a Nashvillian that stayed on campus, I had an opportunity to interact on a regular basis with the Fisk student body, as well as continuing to keep my association with the rest of Nashville, city Nashville. I had been exposed to some of the early training efforts by the school, Jim Lawson, and some of those people that were teaching nonviolence and exploring the opportunities for nonviolent movement in Nashville. And as a result of that, I attended a camp for nonviolent training in Mount Eagle, Tennessee, with the Miles Horton, who was a labor activist, and the school there was one of the training grounds for Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks. Mm-hmm. So as a result of that movement and exposure, I was involved in the early stages of the movement.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekalona. We're talking this hour about the lunch counter sit-ins that started 63 years ago today with King Hollands and Frankie Henry, who were there. Now, Frankie, I understand you didn't take part in the training because you became involved in a different way. Can you tell us about how you found the movement?
Yes, I was a freshman at Tennessee State University. At that time, we were saying A&I State University. I was a physical education major, and I wanted to be a pepperette. Mm-hmm. There was a tap dancing team, and you tapped during the halftime of the basketball games. I lived in South Nashville, so my father thought I would be in the library at that time after my classes, but I was trying to enter into the tapping team, so I would tap, and when the classes were over, I would tie my tap shoes in a bow and throw them across my shoulder, go in front of King's Hall, and catch the Jefferson Street bus, because I lived across town in South Nashville. Mm-hmm. And they had a shelter up on 6th Avenue. And I would take my transfer. And we got to the shelter, and I had my books in my arms and my tap shoes over my shoulder. And this young white lady met me coming off the bus and said, "Are you a college student?" I said, "Yes." Mm. She said, "Will you walk with me for a while?" And I'm saying to myself, what does this white woman want with me? And she said, please. And I said, what's up? She said, this is the first day of the sit-ins. And I don't have anybody to go in Cane's Loans with me. And I want you to join up with me. So we walked through the arcade and down Fifth Avenue. The first place I looked in was Woolworth. And I saw all black students sitting at the counters. And I said, oh, they're going to get in trouble. We can't do this, because I didn't know anything about the sit-in movements. And we passed McClellan's. Students were sitting at the counters, Cress's, and students were sitting at the counters. She said, Frankie, you have on-the-job training. Said, we've been meeting at Kelly Miller's church, and she was talking about the nonviolent movement that King Holland referred to. She said, I don't have anyone to go to Cane's Loans with me. Will you go? So I said to myself, now, if a white girl can put her life on the line for a colored girl like me, surely I will go. So I joined up, and I went to Cane's Loans with her, and we sat at the counter, and we closed the counters, the two of us. So we walked back on Fifth Avenue, and when we got to McClellan's, she said, come, I see an empty bar stool there next to Paul the Parade. He was a white exchange student at Fisk University. However, I knew people at Fisk. My husband for 60 years was a student at Fisk, and he and King Holland graduated in 61 in the same class. I dated him 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. We were a high school sweetheart.
Okay.
So she set me beside Paul and told Paul, please, this is Frankie's first date. Take care of her.
Were you nervous at all?
No, not really. We had a strong neighborhood, so that I didn't realize how dangerous it was until he was explaining to me about the sit-in movements, and I had my left arm on the counter and looking at Paul on the right, and a white lady came, and I felt my arm burning, and she was putting a cigarette out.
She put her cigarette out on your arm. You're showing me the scar right now.
Yes. So I looked at her. She looked back at me. I looked at my arm, and she didn't do anything. She just held it there until it was out. So I'm only 19, and in South Nashville, as a little girl, we would get in fights, you know.
Yes.
So I took my right hand, balled up my fist, and I said, well, this is my first day on the sit-ins, and this is going to be my last day, because I'm getting ready to knock her out.
Yes.
So as I was turning, Reverend Kelly Miller Smith kind of got in front of her and was telling me with his hand, please don't do it. So I kept looking at him, and so I calmed myself down. And as I was calming myself down, she was lighting her matches and pulled my poncho back and threw her matches down my back, and Paul grabbed my poncho that had a big hole in it because it burned my poncho, and they took us out and put us in the paddy wagon.
I want to get to the rest of that story in a minute, but I just want to say at 12:40, just about now, just over a minute ago, it was the time exactly 63 years ago where the first students sat down at the lunch counters in Nashville. King, what does that moment mean to you? I mean, we're 63 years to the day, to the minute.
It's a very monumental moment. The movement was a very important marker for the civil rights of not just Nashville, but for the city. One of the things that we have to remember is that as their small achievements can make a difference. And the sit-in movement in Nashville was inspirational for the eventually for the country, and the support that the Nashville community provided and the training that was involved. Everyone in the city had a part to play. Those people like Frankie and many others, when we would come through the city or walk up Fifth Avenue 2 by 2, and there were crowds of whites jeering at us. It was like walking into the stadium, football stadium, and hearing the cheers of people. But there were many people who said they could not practice nonviolence, but their role was to not get involved and to react to the crowd. So it made a big difference for the movement and for the city.
Yes, sir. We have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll continue to learn about the lunch counter sit-ins that started 63 years ago today in 1960. What do you want to know about the lunch counter sit-ins? Tweet us at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back. I'm Khalil A. Colonna, and this is Nashville. Today, in 1960, the first lunch counter sit-ins began in downtown Nashville in an effort to end segregation in our city. The movement was led by college students. They were harassed, beaten, and arrested, and some were expelled from school. Before the break, we heard firsthand experiences from two of the students who participated in those first sit-ins. Now I would like to introduce a student who took part in the second wave. Professor Gloria McKissack, thank you so much for being here and welcome to This Is Nashville.
Oh, thank you. I'm pleased to be here today on this historic occasion.
It is so good to have you back. Tell me, how did you get involved with the movement?
Oh, boy. 1960, I was actually a high school student. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. So my background was quite a bit different growing up, middle class in such a progressive city as Detroit was back then. And in fact, I was so removed from what was going on in the South. It was only what we watched on television, the news. Mm-hmm. And I remember so clearly watching, for example, what was happening in Birmingham and the young people being attacked by dogs and water hoses, and watching that with my father. They had already decided I would be coming to A&I to attend school. Like so many middle-class blacks said, they sent their children to historic black colleges. And I was just looking at him in amazement because I wasn't exposed to things like that. I went to an integrated school, lived in an integrated neighborhood, et cetera, and I wasn't totally aware of all the things that I couldn't do as an African American. I was very fortunate in that. Mm-hmm. And my dad looked at me and he said, I'm sending you down there to get an education. He said, don't you get involved in what's going on. Now, my father was a political activist, but I was his daughter. If I was his son, he may have had a different attitude. And I don't know what he saw in me that I didn't see in myself, but my reaction was, why would I do that? Why do I want to get in front of dogs and water hoses? I don't think so, Daddy. Anyway, off to school, I came, and I remember just being almost like cultural shock in what I saw in the South. The segregation signs, the racism was everywhere, and a big billboards, you know, with little pickaninnies, and I never saw things like that before. And
so you come down to school, you're a freshman.
Yes.
And against your father's wishes,
yes,
you decide to get involved. What was that tipping point? What was that tipping point for you to decide?
Well, that's what I'm going to get to. I was in the student union, and the Freedom Riders had been expelled. And they were going, Freddie Leonard and some of those people who later will get their honorary doctorates for being in the sit-ins were going around the student union, and they were trying to get young people to join in the sit-ins. The second wave, Woolworths was open, but there were all these other venues that were segregated. From A to Z in Nashville was segregated. And, of course, students did not want to get involved, not at A&I, because you'd get expelled if you went to FIS, a private institution. It was a little different, but A&I was being run by the all-white male, you know, Board of Regents. And they said, no, you get involved, you get expelled. And they came around to our table, and I, said, no, I don't think so. I don't want to, dogs. And, they said, oh, no, they don't have that in Nashville. It's not violent like that. We'll show you what to do. And they just made me feel that I could do this. And it was the right thing to do. I think it was kind of in my DNA, and I didn't know how I would respond. Sometimes you don't know until you get put in the moment. But I have my great-grandfather who was lynched in Mississippi for standing up against the whites when he would not give up his property. So I say it's in my DNA. We're fighters. And I joined them. We went downtown to First Baptist Church, and I received very little training. Everyone was not exposed like King. I had that one day to get it together and make up my mind whether or not I could, put up with what might occur. Okay. And I still wasn't sure how I would react. And we went down to Wilson Quick, and Kelly Miller Smith and others were helping us, telling us what to do. But I didn't even know who those people were at the time. And we went into the restaurant. They had the long counter. We went to the back. Long story short, one by one, they dragged us out of there and threw us on Church Street. And this is a photo of my very first sit-in, and that's John Lewis leading us and the Freedom Riders. And I got frightened. That's when I got a little frightened because I was about the only one left in there. And I said, oh, they might make a real example out of me. But they busboys grabbed me. I did what they told me to do, just become lax, don't resist. They took me and dragged me out down that long aisle. There was a crowd that had gathered outside. I didn't know what was going on. And there was a white lady sitting at the counter. When we would go into places, they'd soap up, throw the food away, soap up the windows, close down the place. And I guess she was one of the waitresses. And when I drew a picture of this when I went home that evening, I still have my sketch of what happened to me that day. And she looked down at me and she said, don't hurt the little nigger. Now, I wasn't used to anybody calling me by that name, and I think that was the moment that I realized that I was going to be a part of this. No one should have to undergo that kind of treatment. And they kicked open the door and threw me out like a sack of potatoes, and that's me. Like I'm the Black Panther 61 years ago, you know, with my arms folded across my chest, ready to protest.
Yes, ma'am.
It's that moment.
Now, thank you for sharing that story. Fellow sit-in participants Frankie Henry and King Hollands are still with us. You know, Frankie, you spent some time in jail for participating in the sit-ins. Can you briefly tell us what that was like?
Well, we were all arrested, John Lewis and King Holland and I. We were just pushed in, we called them the paddy wagon, and they just pushed us in there like we were just a bunch of animals. My tap shoes were around my neck, and my arm was displaced. And when we got to jail downtown, they fingerprinted us, took our mug shots, took us up to our cell. And while we were there, they had the commode in the middle of the floor, and the cops would never leave the bars, so we would have to make a backward circle around the commode to have privacy. They had the bunk beds, about 2 or 3 abreast, with air vents in the beds so the mattresses could breathe. However, they didn't give us any mattresses, no sheets, no pillowcases, no pillows. It was 29, 30, 35 degrees. We would take our compacts and open them up and put them between the bars and slant them over so we can see King Holland and John Lewis in the next cell. It snowed some of the days we were in there, and they had to go out on snow. John Lewis and King Holland, all the guys had to go out on snow details. They fed us, show them your cup, they fed us out of...
those tin cups.
Everything was in this tin cup. The potato soup, the bread, the big spoon, twice a day. And you see the markings on here. This is where King Holland would put them against the bars. They would...
King, how were you able to, and I'm sorry, we only have a little bit of time left. How were you able to keep yourself, your spirit up, and your mind focused?
Well, because of the spirit of all of the participants, people like Frankie and Gloria, who and those of us who had had the training, and we knew the importance of the movement, and we got a lot of support again from the outside community. Most people don't realize that it wasn't just the people downtown, but the outside community also participated. When Vivian Henderson, who was the economics professor at Fisk, proposed an economic boycott for Nashville downtown, and we were arrested prior to that, and part of the efforts there was to show the city that we needed to put some pressure on the city to do some things. People in the city supported us with money, property values, and those kind of things to provide bail for us, because it was not a good feeling for especially the females to sleep on those slats without any cover or bedding, and to have that treatment. And the food was again in a very small cup.
And they tried us one by one. It was over 79 or 80, some of us, in jail. And the first person they tried couldn't leave until they had tried all of us.
Of you.
And so it took over 2 weeks.
I want to thank you all for being on the show. That was Frankie Henry. She was along with Mr. King Hollett and Professor Gloria McKissack. They all took part in the lunch counter sit-ins that helped to change the course of history in our country. Again, thank you for being here today. On behalf of my parents, thank you for inspiring them, and thank you for giving them ideals that help myself and generations after. Really appreciate you all being here with us today. We want to thank everybody who tuned in this hour. Tomorrow, we're going to learn why the state is rejecting CDC funding for HIV care. This is Nashville is a production of WPLN News and Nashville Public Radio. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Our producers are Steve Harouche, Rose Gilbert, and Magnolia McKay. Our digital lead is Anna Gallegos-Cannon. Michaela Elias is our technical director. Our executive producer is Andrea Tudhope. The masterminds behind our theme music are Larange and Namir Blade. Special thanks to Betsy Phillips, Alice Randall, and Dr. Larotha Williams. The conversation doesn't end here. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. Find us on Instagram and let us know what you want from our city by filling out our quick survey online. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Ekalona. Rest in peace to True Gory the Dove, and we'll see you tomorrow, everybody. Be good to each other.